The UK is a really underrepresented destination for adventure and travel.
Why is that?
Because it's boring, is the perception. So we always say soggy sandwiches and National Trust properties. And I think people always associate it's going to rain and you're going to be going on a hike with your parents. The way it's been sold, it's just dated. And now perceptions are changing. We captured something and it actually was on the front of a magazine. People were like, where is that? And then they found out it was Norfolk and they were like, what? That can't be Norfolk. Every country's got something going for it, but the UK, I think, has got a lot going for it.
You two went on your own adventure, going on a change of path, both founding the travel project, which highlights UK travel and adventure.
We said to ourselves, okay, well, what happens if we don't take any aeroplanes for our adventures and try and do 52 UK adventures in 52 weeks? Fell pony trekking in the Lake District had it all. Cairngorms is the UK's only Arctic wilderness. It's amazing. Almost every autumn we'll plan one trip to the Wye Valley, Holcombe, up in Norfolk.
Yeah,
beautiful place to be in the winter. This opportunity to get outdoors into the middle of some extraordinary wild spaces, it became really apparent that adventure is good for you. Because it just felt like with all these things going on, just getting outside and climbing a hill, you felt infinitely better off the back of it.
Thank you, Charlie, for joining me.
No problem, pleasure.
Fresh from a recent adventure in Scotland.
Yeah.
What have you been doing up there?
So we went up with a couple of mates and 3 boys under the age of 3, actually, to spend New Year's there with the thinking that it would be lovely to wake up in the Highlands on the 1st of January and look at the year ahead through this sort of epic Scottish Highland lens. And it was exactly that. We were nervous before we went, in all honesty, because we were thinking, if it rains the whole time, what are we going to do with these boys, If it's freezing cold, what are we going to do with these boys? But our attitude tends to be, there's only one way to find out. So up we went, and we got extremely lucky. It was a mixture of sunshine and then heavy snow that settled and provided probably one of my favourite ever Highlands experiences. And we were with these 2 friends, as I've referenced, and they had never been before. So seeing it with them through their eyes was quite exciting as well. And the boys just running around on these empty beaches, and what the roads are like up there, unbelievable. But if you go at the wrong time, they're packed. And something a bit sort of almost a bit sad when you see them packed like that, they can't handle it. But this time round, there was no one on it, it was just us. So yeah, it was amazing. Come back buzzing from a trip like that, you feel alive, full of ideas. So yeah, this week just been going through the hard drive, trying to get through the pictures and the video and the film, and putting together a little film on the experience. But yeah, it was a real win. I would describe it as. Is
a travel or is a holiday with you never a full holiday?
Yeah,
because there's always content to be captured.
Yeah,
you cannot escape traveling in the UK and be a UK travel influencer without capturing it along the way. So is work always with you?
Yeah, the short answer, yes. It's a question that we get asked a fair bit, I suppose. But the way that my brain is in a creative sense, to sound a bit pompous about it, I love seeing opportunities to capture photography and video and tell stories. So I like it that way. I don't know if we took away, our project and Instagram and all of the various things that we've amassed over the last however many years, I'd still be doing it. And that might sound like a lie. I wonder if it does sound like a lie, but it's true. It really, really is. So it's not a burden or a stress. It's just, the way I like it.
I can relate to that, actually, being a filmmaker and photographer myself. When I've traveled globally, the one thing I've had on me at all times is my camera, mostly to take stills. And there is a beauty in capturing a moment when you feel fully connected with it.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really take away from the moment. It almost enhances it because you're working out how to get that best shot.
I think so. And I also think that the way that it works for me is that I find myself more engaged with an experience because I'm looking for different things within the experience and details and looking out for, I guess, the moments in the day that jump out, and that's quite exciting. But I think it's important to say that we have cameras downtime as well, especially because with Sonny, our son, we're very conscious of having cameras out the whole time around him, because that is a bit weird. So we'll just put them down and do, large sections of the day. Or what we'll probably do is have a little 35mm on us. So it's just, you can just strap it onto you and off you go and not be too intrusive. But yeah, I just love it, really, as does Jess. So I feel very lucky in that respect.
I guess the hard work actually begins coming back home.
Yeah.
That's when you have to trawl through your footage and actually work out what to do with it.
But I love that as well. I love that process because it allows you to digest the experience in quite a different way, perhaps, because you're quite literally looking at snapshots. Your kind of memories are being formed there and then, or sculpted, and you're getting an opportunity to relive parts of it. And then again, back to the way that my brain works personally, is that I'm starting to think about what's the moment from that will look good in a story, what's the story I want to tell as well. I've spent large parts of this week thinking about the video and what's the most interesting way to start the video. And that process is laborious, as you've touched on, as you will well know, but I enjoy it as well. So again, I'm perhaps coming across as smug, but I just really like it. I really enjoy the whole process.
As a filmmaker, I know that capturing and filming is one aspect, but crafting something in the edit is where the magic really happens. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, full transparency. I mean, I don't consider myself a filmmaker. I'm very conscious of kind of saying I'm a filmmaker, because honestly, I'm not even technically a photographer. I've never studied either of the two of them. I picked up a camera when I was little a lot and took photographs and learnt to take better photographs probably about 7 years ago and got into it. And then in terms of sort of motion and video and film, I've only really started to pay attention to trying to be better at that in the last 2-3 years, probably. And that, as I'm sure you'll guess, is alongside Instagram Reels. So that in itself isn't a very organic way to start wanting to tell stories in a sense. But when I resisted it for years, filmmaking, because I was just like, God, there's so much to it. I'm going to be rubbish at it. There's so many talented people out there. And then I got into it, I guess by necessity. And now I'm really into it, really hooked. So I'm trying to get better and better and better. So hopefully one day can say, I make films and people think they're good.
Well, the beauty of social media, one of the best things that's come out in the last 10 years is that you can start photography or filmmaking with the one tool that we all have, which is a smartphone.
Yeah. No, I agree. But sort of conversely, if you will, is that it's so homogenized now. And that's something that I think about a lot, especially when your influence is this, in Instagram, for example, is this feed. And it's a cliched thing to say now, everyone knows it, but it's very samey. These sort of trends develop and these formulas that are going to beat the algorithm or do well on the algorithm. And we fall into that trap. I like to think not that often, but it is a trap that most people fall into, and it affects the way people think films should be made. And actually one of the things I'm trying to do this year is make stuff that is a bit different, which is quite hard to do. I would suggest when you're kind of reliant on an algorithm as one of your streams of income, essentially, which is, what the position we find ourselves in. Maybe
we'll come to that in a bit, actually. Talk about how you can stand out.
Sure.
But later on. But I suppose for the people listening, you could kind of summarize. I mean, you talked about your partner, Jess. You two went on your own adventure in life, going on a change of path. And creating a new lifestyle, a new work career for both of yourselves, to now being both founding the Travel Project, which is a very popular Instagram page, which highlights UK travel and adventure. You also co-founded the Outside Studio, which is a production company,
content studio,
capturing stills and photography, telling stories through that media. But that wasn't how you started.
No, it wasn't. I mean, we've both just turned 37, so depending on who you are listening to this, we're not the youngest. So in the previous life, if you want to call it that, we both worked in, we call them marketing agencies, advertising agencies below the line. So sort of digital stuff, different agencies. Jess was head of production and head of client services. So she is extremely organized and very good with clients and keeping clients happy and making, conducting and producing really big shoots, which has been extremely helpful from a travel project and outside studio perspective. And I worked at an agency where we made, I guess, social campaigns. And back in the day when it was all about virality, which I suppose it still is, but everyone was like, oh, can you make us a viral video? You remember those days? And I worked as what I was called a social creative. And then I managed to get up to head of social at this agency. And we did campaigns for Netflix, Sony Music. So I guess you would call it kind of fun stuff, really. Brands that had interesting identities and wanted to push it a little bit and do some fun stuff. So yeah, we had this sort of background in that. I always say that industry, they get you in when you're young and excited, and they say that'll be free beer on a Friday, and we've got a ping pong table, and you're like, oh great, what? This is amazing, and you're going to pay me. And then quite quickly, what happens is you realise it's well, be careful here. I started to think, as did Jess, it was slightly repetitive and slightly vacuous. And you were making all these ideas for people who didn't really care too much about it. It was just content and more content and more content. And round about the end of our 20s, so we were both 29, I think, was also a time where Instagram was starting to bubble, and people were talking about it, especially in agencies, as like, this is really going to change the way that stories are told and marketing is done. So now I warn you in advance, this is a slightly long story. I'll try and keep it briefer. We had this idea that what happens if we went round the world, but we weren't allowed to use travel apps or guidebooks. You're only allowed to connect with people via Instagram. So you would fly to Delhi and you would use the app to contact 3 creatives of interest. Then you'd meet up with them, and then they would tell you what to do and then tell you where to go. So there would be an entirely kind of user-generated experience. So basically we thought, it's a pretty good idea.
Yeah, and nothing like that had probably been ever done.
Well, it was the first time ever it had been done, yeah. So we were the world's first Instagram-powered adventure. That's how the travel project started. We obviously did our homework beforehand and put some feelers out to people in the industry, and we're like, what do you think of this? And they were like, that's cool. Sometimes you have an idea and then, you're in your own head and it's perhaps other people won't find it as exciting. So we went out and did it basically. We went around the world doing it. And it was crazy. It was really a real experience.
Were you able to get funding for that through the contacts you had?
So long story short, we were going to do something in partnership with an agency, and it went a bit sour. They wanted a bit too much of our. They wanted too much basically from us, and so we decided we'll self-fund it because the thesis was we'll go away, have an incredible experience. On the experience, the idea is not only to have an off the beaten track locally, like we call it localized, to see the world through local eyes, but we would also be putting together kind of a body of work essentially. So when we came back, we would then be able to get a job at our old agency, but a new agency perhaps, by showing, look, we went away, but we did this. So that was kind of our thinking. And what happened is that I don't remember how long it took, but we started to get some followers on Instagram. People were like, this is different, I suppose. And then we had an article written on us in the Drum magazine. Do you know the Drum? It was like a marketing sort of industry press thing. And then that got picked up by Business Insider, and then, some slightly bigger, I think maybe the Independent or something. And then we were like, oh, okay, well, maybe we've got something here. Maybe this project is a thing in its own right. So we came back and we did some freelancing stuff to keep it going, and then we went away again and it grew again. And then again, sort of trying to paraphrase the story, we made a decision before COVID to go to start making films about off the beaten track places that no one else went to, or very few other people went to, sorry. So for example, we went to Kukeri Festival in Bulgaria. Do you know anything about that? So if you've ever seen people dressed up in terrifying sort of monster outfits in the snow up in the Bulgarian mountains, as soon as you see one of those photos, you never forget it. So we went out and filmed a thing out there, and we went to Ukraine in 2018, 2019, I think, and went out and did this adventure out in the mountains, the Carpathians there, with a local guy who took us out. And then actually on the way back from Bulgaria, get a message from my mum. Have you heard about this? What were they calling it there? Corona-19 on the way back. And I remember thinking, yeah, I've heard about it, but don't worry, it's not a thing. And it was just my mum being overly, mummish. And then obviously we know what happened. And in that lockdown, the first one, the really, tough first one, we just basically ripped everything up and we're like, what do we want to do with this thing? What do we want to do with our lives? And
how did those experiences when you were traveling the globe change you?
Yeah, well, I mean,
coming back to like doing the office job and then working for other people.
Yeah.
So you must have had some, hang on, this is a sense of like, this is fun, this is exciting. We're the ones that are out here doing it.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah. So as I touched on, and you picked up on there, that when you were an agency, it was very much you're making stuff for other people, and you come up with a good idea, like this is a great idea, and then they're like, yeah, we're not going to put that in the pitch or whatever it was. You're like, you're like, it's gutting. But with this freedom again that you've touched on there of being, in charge, I guess. Any idea you wanted to put forward, you could put forward, and that was very liberating, very exciting all round. And then coming back was a bit of a bump, it was a reality check, but we were very focused on trying to get back out there and trying to turn it into something. At that point, we didn't know what that something was at all. We weren't very business minded at that point. It was more just about creating something, and we were making some money, but it wasn't a career at that point at all. And the other effect it had on us, actually, interestingly, was we started thinking a lot about our carbon footprint, because we were just...
What made you think about that? What made you put that at the forefront of your mind?
Well, we were just jumping on planes for fun. It was just, we would, well, that's a bit strong. We were just flying a lot. And then when COVID hit and it settled, you had so much time to think, didn't you? And you were like, at that moment in time, we were promoting via our Instagram, just jumping on a plane and flying to wherever it may be. And that was sort of twofold irresponsible. It felt, I'm not saying other people are irresponsible for doing that, because each to their own, but for me, it just didn't sit quite right. And same for Jess. It was environmentally, it felt like we can't be promoting that actively to feel comfortable within our project. But also like financially, it's unachievable to live that lifestyle. If you want to try and be a good influence on people, you can't, well, be careful here, because I know everyone does their own thing, right? And that's cool, but it just felt weird promoting constantly, getting on airplanes constantly, because people have work, people don't have money, people are busy, people, might not want to be having that bigger carbon footprint. So that was a real moment for us, COVID. It was it just allowed us the time to come to that realization. So we kind of thought, well, the UK is a really underrepresented destination for adventure and travel.
Why is that?
Well, because it's boring is the perception.
Yeah.
So we always say soggy sandwiches and National Trust properties. So when I was little, I used to go on holiday to Yorkshire and Scotland, and people at school and people might be going to sort of like Spain or the Algarve or something, and they would look at the option that I had is like, that's rubbish. But actually it wasn't. And I think people always associate it's going to rain and you're going to be going on a hike with your parents and it's going to be boring or whatever. And I think, or rather we always reference, Jess and I, we always say it's a brand issue. The comms, the way it's been sold it's just dated and a bit boring. And I actually think in the last 3 or 4 years that's changed a bit, and perceptions are changing for a variety of different reasons, but it's still got a long way to go.
Social media must be a key inflection point in that.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, because
people like yourself are taking control of what you choose to champion and celebrate.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, but I also think that like the kind of arc or the graph rather of social media is interesting to look at, because when it first came on the scene, it was all about, who can post a picture of themselves looking tiny up against the biggest mountain in Europe, or like all these extraordinary foreign places. Essentially, that was the most desirable type of content. And now I think when there's more people out there, more voices, it's changed to, like, let's try and surprise people with, what they can find on their doorstep a bit more. So yeah, it's suffered from people thinking it's boring, basically, and really inaccurately as well. I mean, there probably every country's got something going for it, but the UK, I think, has got a lot going for it in terms of the outdoor culture, I would say.
Yeah, let's talk about the United Kingdom. I'm proud to be born British, and super proud that most of my school holidays as a kid were on UK land, mostly in North Norfolk, on the North Norfolk coast, and we've done some adventures there. Yeah, I have very, very fond memories of that part of the world where I spent a lot of time, because that was where my mom's side of my family were, even though I grew up in the Midlands. We're never that far away from coastline. Sure. I think the statistic is something like 70 miles the furthest you're ever away from the coast. Yeah. We have the most incredible kind of history and heritage and culture within our coastlines, and it's so varied and diverse around every different region of coastline, from like the rocky shores of like Cornwall to like the flatlands of North Norfolk coast. That is one thing that we have hugely to celebrate with the UK for a start. Yeah, is access to the sea.
Yeah, and I think there's, I always get this wrong, but there's around 6,000 islands off the UK or Great Britain potentially. And
there's never enough down south though, is there?
No, I know. But that's in itself, I choose to take not as a blessing, but it's quite a cool thing, because you got to travel for the islands. And when you find them, it's like, wow, this is cool. But yeah, we've got this access to coastline, which is extraordinary. It's like, to an extent unparalleled, certainly, in our corner of Europe, it's really quite amazing. And we find that, when we go to the more extreme, I guess, coastal areas, whether it be the Hebrides or whatever, that's what attracts the characters, these people that are, I guess, more extreme in nature, the artists, the artisans, the makers, the people with stories, the people with history. And we found that to be a real pattern, around our coastlines as well. These sort of really interesting people doing interesting things.
Okay, I'm going to have to pull you on this after the recording for anyone who you might think might be worth.
I got loads. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, got loads.
I'd love to speak to some of those. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's a big part of, I guess, our project, but just more basically our passion is like meeting cool people. And the only reason, why do we like meeting cool people? I just love the conversations that you've never had before, and seeing the world through someone else's eyes. There's so many interesting people in the world, but if you just look at the UK, and because we're lucky enough to speak the same language as them, you can really go deep with understanding what they're about.
And it goes back to your first project of connecting with local people who can tell you, because they know the land more so than anyone else in the area.
Exactly. And we're big on that, because if you go to, we always say, if you come to London and you look at a guidebook, you're going to end up at M&M's World and Buckingham Palace or wherever it may be. But hopefully we're a bit better than that now. But if you were to go and speak to a maker or an artisan or someone who's got real ties to, let's say, the East End of London or whatever it may be, you have a totally different experience, where they'd be like, well, don't go there. This is the place you should go. And that applies across the world and certainly in the UK.
How can we do that though? How can we connect with these people who, is it just based going on the streets and just talking?
I think it's, in my experience, there's a couple of ways of doing it. It's talking. We talk a lot to people who work in pubs, cafes, restaurants, who on the whole are extremely friendly, especially in the hospitality industry, because they're probably in there because they've their personality leans that way. And wherever we go, Scotland last week, there's only about 4 places open. You go in there, have a conversation, ask them, what's good to do, on a very basic level. Or if you're looking for something more specifically, like we were looking for a fisherman who might be able to sell us some fish. So you don't know anyone, and they'll say, oh, X just lives around the corner. He's away, but his son, Y will give you the number. And people want to help you. They want to show you their corner. On the whole, they want to show you their corner of the world, the UK, because they're excited and they're proud. And those conversations, more often than not, lead to an experience that you wouldn't be able to get anywhere else. So that's the most sort of like analog answer. And from a digital perspective as well, like what we do and what we did in the first iteration of our project is we reach out to people and we say, hi, you live there. Is there any chance you could let us know what your favorite things to do are? And sometimes people ignore you. Some people won't see the message. But then often you'll get a message back saying, yeah, of course. Yeah. These are the things, then they take it quite seriously because they've got time to prep digitally. Whereas if you're in a cafe, they're like, oh yeah, well this, that and that. And they might remember something later, but digitally they'll write it down and give you, some great answers. So, that's how we go about doing it. And it's been quite good so far, I would say.
Going back to your story, you came back from your journeys abroad. Got confined to the insides of your own home in COVID, and then had this realization that what you were doing was not necessarily what you wanted to promote. And you kind of found this love to return back to home, I guess. Is that what your calling became? Yeah,
it was really. We'd already started, I think we'd done like 2 Achievable Adventures, is what we call them. But then they were Achievable Adventures, it wasn't really a thing, but we'd done 2. And that was quite cool.
What were those 2?
So one was the New Forest. And good question. I can't remember the other one, but I remember we'd only done a couple.
What did you do in the New Forest? That felt adventurous.
Well, we just
visiting.
We just hiked across. We did our project, so we asked the local. They took that. We went to some beautiful spots. Basically, went to a lady who had been selling strawberries on the side of the road there for God knows how many years, and went and bought strawberries off her and had a chat. All these were all tips that people had given us. And it just worked, it worked quite well. And we're like, okay, well that worked. And it was pretty easy in terms of like, you didn't have to get on an airplane. You didn't have to have a passport, all the obvious stuff. But it was like, okay, that was more achievable. It was cheaper as well. So yeah, that kind of, I guess, registered. And then when we were in lockdown, one evening, we were talking about what we could potentially do when it opened up again, because you remember those conversations. It was like, God, what are we going to do when we can finally, and we started talking about the River Thames. Jess grew up at the Oxfordshire end of the River Thames, so the source, near Lechlade. And I grew up in the London side of the Thames, right? So I'd seen this urban beast that was kind of a bit smelly and full of life and exciting, but just not really, I wouldn't say it was conventionally beautiful. And go however many miles, I should know the answer to that, however many miles towards Oxfordshire, it was this smaller river meandering through these quiet meadows, essentially. And we were like, well, that river connects us, technically, but we don't know anything about it. We know nothing about it, It's on our doorstep. We don't know anything about it. And then she said, why don't we canoe the length of the river? And I was like, great, that's a great idea. It sounds cool. Let's do it. So we basically put into, we just sort of planned it roughly. Then it opened up. We did 0 training. I was just so arrogant about it. I just thought, oh, I'm in good shape. I'll be absolutely fine. Silly approach, of course. And then we did it, and it was meant to take, what was it meant to take? 6 or 7 days, as per our calculations, which were absolutely ridiculous calculations.
Yeah, which is tough going, yeah.
Yeah, tough going. And like, no training. We're in a Canadian canoe, 4-man with 2 people, all our kit, tents, tripods, cameras, bags, cooker, you know, it's just ridiculous. It's me thinking like, I remember a mate saying to us the night before, like, because we were having a few beers the night before, he's like, you should be having a few beers. I was like, yeah, it'd be fine. Like, there'll be times where we'll just be able to stop and the flow will take us. That never happened. So anyway, it ended up taking 15 days. And it was absolutely brutal.
Were those long hard 15 days as well?
Yeah. It was the middle of summer, August heat wave. So it was 34 degrees. It was a real heat wave. And they were like, some days were 5 a.m. to 9 p.m.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was like endurance adventure in a way that I'd not done endurance adventure before. But it was incredible. You know, we learned so much about the river, and the river had this extraordinary atmosphere, which I suppose rivers do. They attract people who love the water. So everyone who's there loves the water, and they're in a good mood because they're on the water. So there was this energy that was literally flowed down the river from Oxford to London, and we were lucky enough to kind of like sample that. And I suppose my point here is that that adventure made us think like, well, if you can have an adventure like that on the River Thames, which to me was like a pretty mundane place, the River Thames, in my London head, then what is there, you know, in Cornwall? What is there in Suffolk and Norfolk, in Scotland, in Wales and Northern Ireland? You know, and that was quite exciting. So we said to ourselves, okay, well, what happens if we don't take any aeroplanes for our adventures? They're out, no aeroplanes. Okay, cool, good first rule. What happens if we try and do 52 UK adventures in 52 weeks? Sounds good. You know, coming from a marketing background, it's like, okay, well, sounds cool. You know, let's go do that. That's so exciting. Again, quite hard to do actually. From a production standpoint.
Yeah, sounds achievable. Yeah, but not when you have to do all the back end work.
Yeah, the back end work and you know, funding it and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and then you've got no breaks in your weekends because all your weekends are now.
Oh yeah, it was a year long project.
Yeah,
it was a year long project.
We didn't have a weekend off where you can just sit and watch TV.
Yeah, exactly. So it was absolutely mad. And then halfway through, or circa halfway through, Jess got pregnant, and so that you know,
another element to the adventure.
Another element, yeah. And then we found out she had a condition which turns out it was fine in the end, but it made it quite a high risk pregnancy. So it was this like year of trying to complete this project and all of this other stuff going on, and it was a very formative experience, as I'm sure you can imagine.
Did you enjoy it? Were you able to enjoy it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Interestingly, the other thing that was going on, Jess had a high risk, we collectively had a high risk pregnancy, and that was very stressful. Simultaneously, I had a pretty, I guess, traumatic experience happen with my family at the same time. And so there was this kind of stress happening. But what this project allowed us was, and I'm always hesitant to say escape because I think that's not quite the right word, but this opportunity to get outdoors into the middle of some extraordinary wild spaces, to do some things that perhaps some people in their lives would never get to do, and be alone with our thoughts and process what was going on and gain perspective as to what was important. I suppose it's difficult not to slip into cliches here, but it became really apparent that what we came to paraphrase as adventure is good for you. That was our thing that we came up with afterwards, because it just felt like with all these things going on, just getting outside and climbing a hill, you felt infinitely better off the back of it. Even if you didn't want to climb the hill at the beginning.
Yeah, it was removing yourself from one mindset and putting yourself in another.
Yeah, one environment to another.
And you had to be in a different environment for that mindset to change.
You got it. Yeah, that's it.
But sometimes the hardest thing is to leave that front door.
Yeah.
Because you just feel like, I just don't feel like I can.
Yeah.
You don't realize until you're out there doing it, what it brings to you.
You're absolutely right. I mean, it's back to the sort of barriers to entry thing. I think one of the things we feel strongly about in our project is trying to say adventure doesn't always have to be this extraordinary, life-changing experience. It just has to be getting yourself slightly outside your comfort zone, going somewhere new, almost speaking to someone different, and getting yourself from one environment and headspace into another. And that's what we learned. Like, it was kind of like a real, not a crash course, but it was an intense year of learning that lesson in various different ways, again and again and again. That, just changing your horizons changes your horizons. You know, it just allows you to see, literally and metaphorically, different things, basically.
Yeah, and I think one of the things which I really admire about you is also about celebrating the local. And you talked about your experience kayaking the Thames. I mean, first of all think that's a great adventure, but for many, maybe, you know, the Thames, like you say, they see it as not, you know,
not sexy.
I suppose it is quite sexy. There's other rivers maybe in the UK that would be less sexy, right?
Yeah.
But the Thames is kind of heralded as like it's the longest river in England, right?
Yeah.
But for some people, they were like, no, adventure for me is like, I want to kayak down the Nile. I want that foreign experience as well.
Yeah.
And to be fair, the foreign element adds so much more to an adventure, because suddenly nothing is comfortable. Everything, different language, different cultures, different people. And I can understand why that is a part of the adventure.
More appealing,
But what does it say about how if you shift your mindset and actually work out how you can celebrate the things that you already have around you and look at them differently, and how you maybe travel through them differently, so that you can appreciate them in a different way. And you said about how being on the river, you were just embraced by the whole experience that the river gave you. And I think that if you were to go for a walk and, you know, sit on a bench and look at the river, you'd get maybe like if you sat there for 20 minutes, you'd get a 20-minute experience of the river, and it'd be lovely, it'd be nice, but you won't see all that the river has to offer you.
Absolutely,
because nature is just ever flowing, and it's never predictable. So you might not glimpse the very best of it, but you'll get something from it. But once you commit to fully being present in that place of nature, and we see this with, you know, wildlife filmmakers and photographers who spend weeks in one area just waiting and waiting and waiting.
Yeah.
If you allow yourself to be in that position, like be on a boat in the river all day, then you will see things that you could not have seen if you had just passed by and seen the river and then walked back on again. Be like, well, I've got my river for the day. But actually being on it, you really do allow yourself to open up the world of what it can offer you.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's true of all of our sort of outdoor spaces. You know, if you were to hike a trail or a mountain, you'd have a specific experience that would be informed by the weather conditions and the other sort of variables that came your way. But if you were to, say, camp at the top of the mountain and you existed in that space and you almost had the time to be a little bit bored and let your mind switch off and go into different places, you would absorb totally different things about the experience. You'd probably see, it being the UK, see about 5 different types of weather. You would potentially meet other people. You would, like I say, sort of gaze out over it, and it would hit you in different ways. And
the sunset and the sunrise.
Exactly. And there's something about that I guess is quite core to our project as well. That's that, you know, although you can have shorter adventures, if you have the time to stay the night somewhere and be somewhere for a long period of time, it will have a bigger effect on you, basically. And we want to create experiences that last longer than any suntan. The idea there being, you know, you can go to, you know, on a holiday to Spain. When I was little, I used to think, when I was younger, like 18, 19, you go, oh, I've got to go and get a tan. Right, I'm going on a holiday, go and get a tan. And then you come back, oh, I'm tanned for a week. And it goes away. And now I think really the best thing to have out of an adventure and experience some time off is to have something that affects you 6 months, a year, 5 years down the line. And you have little things that you just learn from it that you carry with you, that may make you feel calmer, that may inform some decision making later down the line. I think that's the best outcome. But personally, I think that,
yeah. These 52 adventures, the achievable adventures that you set yourself a task to do within a year, formed the basis of your book.
Yes.
Achievable Adventures.
Yes.
So let's talk a bit about that. First of all, what is an achievable adventure?
Yeah, good question. So, I mean, an achievable adventure quite literally is just one that you don't have to be sort of a super highly trained endurance athlete. You don't necessarily always need loads of money or loads of time. So it's like we wanted to create a bank of adventures that people could look at and go, oh, we've got time, next weekend we can do that one, but we haven't really got time for that one, but let's stick a pin in it because we'll do that next time. So it's a spread of adventures that are achievable for most people. We were kind of really into this idea that we wanted to democratize it, essentially, like to say to people, give people confidence to go out there and have these experiences, because we do think they're transformational, as discussed. So we wanted to use the word, like, you've obviously got the alliteration, but it's like saying to people, it's achievable. You can go out and do something like this and you can feel the benefits of it. So the idea was to kind of create this spread, and the book is done on we have like a key at the beginning of each adventure that says how long it will take you, how difficult it is, how expensive it will be. And the idea, quite obviously, is that to be a filter. So you go, okay, that's not for me. Turn the page, ticks all the boxes. Because you might, there's people out there who've got lots of money, but they're short on time. There are people out there who don't really want to do something really extreme. There are people out there who can't afford to do certain adventures. And we want to create a spread so that there's quite literally something for everyone to achieve it. And I hope we achieved that. We've got some nice feedback, so I'm going to say that we did a half decent job at least.
It's a beautiful book.
Thank you.
I think you're bringing together so much of the skills that you've learned over the years in your own photography as well within the book.
Oh yeah, thanks. Well, it's funny, as a creative, like you'll appreciate this, that some of those photos were taken 4 years ago now. God, I look at them and I'm like, you want your work to be better and better and better, but it's very cool to have a physical product in what is essentially a digital world that we exist in. So that's why we were so allured by the potential of doing a book, and to have it, to think it's in people's houses and they're looking at it and then they're going out and doing the adventures is just like a really cool feeling, really, really cool feeling. And we get messages quite regularly saying, I just wanted to tell you that we did this, whatever it may be, like the sailing in Norfolk or whatever it may be. And that's like probably the best feeling and thing to come out of this entire project, are those messages. So yeah, it's really cool.
You've inspired me, actually, because Norfolk is a place, like I said, that I've visited a lot, but seeing you sail on the salt marshes, in that kind of how do you describe that sailing boat? It's very old fashioned.
The muscle boats.
A muscle boat.
But they've got these blood red sails.
It's more like a drape, isn't it?
Yeah. People say swallows and Amazons. Is that what it's called?
Oh,
yeah.
Right. Yeah.
People say that's where it takes you. We took a photo. So we did our first trip with them. Maybe 4 years ago now, and we took an image. And it was one of those images where we were lucky with the light and stuff, but we captured something and it actually was on the front of a magazine, and it kind of slightly changed things for us because it tapped into this thing where people were like, where is that? And then they found out it was the UK, and they were like, what? And then they found out it was Norfolk, and they were like, what? That can't be Norfolk. And so, that experience in particular is a transformational one for us, our project. And I think other people's perception, I hope, of what's possible here.
Yeah. Well, if you don't mind, take us through one of your 52 Achievable Adventures, maybe one of your favorites or one of your most memorable, or something that comes to mind. And why would it come to mind, first of all?
Gosh, my mind's darting about, like, I just like trying to pick a favorite child to an extent. I mean, I always say the Coastal Exploration Company that we've just touched on there, but perhaps that's a bit boring, so we've just spoken about it. Fell pony trekking in the Lake District, I think, had it all. And what I mean by that is it had all of the things that we've spoken about boiled down into an adventure. So there's a man called Tom up there who his goal essentially is to make sure that the fell ponies that are indigenous to the area don't go extinct, don't go out of use. He's extremely passionate about it. He is someone who, if you spend an hour with him, you come out just excited about life and inspired by his energy and enthusiasm. He takes people out with these fell ponies to trek across those beautiful Lake District Cumbrian mountains. They're essentially pack ponies, so they carry supplies on them across these ancient trails and routes across the Lake District. And we did a half day thing with him because we were tight on time, but he takes people out and to camp out on those beautiful locations and does 4-day treks across. So I'll probably pick that one out because it felt transformative. You basically plod along with these horses, and I don't really have I'm not one of those people that has a connection naturally with horses. Horses are nice. But at the end of it, it was only 5 hours, and I'd formed a kind of bond with my pony. And I think it was just like that methodical one step after the other. You're going at that slower pace. You're in this environment that makes you feel very lucky to be there. And all the while you've got this guy, Tom, who's just enthusiasm, knowledge, kindness. His delivery is extremely gentle. He's not a sort of know-it-all or anything, just softly spoken. And it was one of those experiences where I just thought, this is really special, and I feel so lucky to be doing it. I feel like everyone, in the UK should get the opportunity to do it. Obviously not realistic, but it was a really special thing.
You've sold it to me. So
he's an interesting guy for you to chat to. Yeah. Really interesting guy. I mean, he was involved in do you remember the motorway protests? This is really untechnical account, but back in the day where they all camped up in the top of trees. I can't remember exactly where it was, around the M25 maybe.
I remember a video footage on the news about that.
Yeah. So he was one of those guys. And I think probably unfairly, but I'll be honest, when I found out about that prior, I was like, I've got an image of the sort of person he'll be. I was very wrong, very, very wrong. He was, and that was quite sort of humbling. Since that, I try not to judge books by their covers, as we all try not to, but he really is a good example of why you should just wait to hear what someone has to say. Very fascinating guy.
And where in the Lake District is he based?
So he's near Windermere.
Okay.
I think he's at the northern end of Windermere. And he does it with his daughter as well, which is quite nice because she's young, so she was like maybe 18 or something, but she's taking this on, which is very cool, because the old man in me wants to say, all these 18-year-olds want to be on TikTok, and she's out there promoting and educating people on fell ponies. So yeah, it was a very cool experience.
Well done for finding these very unique experiences in these different places.
Thanks, yeah.
It's true testament to what you've learned from talking to locals and building connections to find these things which are off the beaten track and then collating them all in a book. Was a book always on the cards when you set this out, or was this just a challenge you set for yourselves?
No. So the challenge was, why did we do it? We just did it because it just felt exciting. It felt like that's a really cool way to get to know the country you were born in. As I've said, we had these experiences. We had COVID, we had the Thames experience, and we were like, we don't know anything really about the island that we live on. So let's try and really get to know it. It's almost like studying it for a year. So no, we didn't. The book was never on the cards. We had an email from a publisher, after the fact. So, it wasn't that long ago now, maybe 2 years ago, or a year and a half. And we were like, do you want to do a book? And yeah, so one bit of negotiation later, and we were writing it. It's quite exciting. Yeah.
Did you enjoy the process of collating that all together?
Yes and no. I love the process of going into their offices in London and sitting down with the design team and visualizing what it was going to look like. That's I love that, as does Jess. Laying out what images, thousands of images to go through and arguing over which one was the best. And I love that process. Writing it, I hate writing, but I had to write it. I don't hate writing. That's not true. It's quite laborious. You've got to write it every day. You're sitting down to write, and I'm not particularly disciplined. So that side of it was like having to do homework after a while.
Yeah, I can relate.
Yeah,
I'm doing my own writing project at the moment.
Oh, are you? How are you getting on?
It's not bad. I've just set myself a challenge in the winter months. So when the clocks change. I think we're quite relatable, actually. You set yourself challenges that are kind of creative and get you and learn. I did the same this winter. Yeah. When the clocks changed in October, I wanted over the 6 months to write every day. So two pages of paper, front and back. So 4 pages in total. I'm actually writing about another challenge that I did where I ran 1,001 days in a row.
Wow, cool, great.
So I've got lots of stories to tell from that. Yeah. And I just want to collate them all up and put them in a book as a book about run streaking and my journey through it. And hopefully people can learn through my own experiences and the stories I've got to tell. Amazing. Through kind of a creative non-fiction piece.
It's interesting that you set yourselves what I would describe as achievable but also trackable tasks, daily tasks, basically. That's what the 52 is about. You said if you do, was it 4 pages every day? It's like the thinking, I suppose, might be similar, which is that if you do that, you can track your progress as you go. And surely at the end of it, you'll have learned something, you'll have gained something, a creative idea will have been birthed. It's like, otherwise we're all trying to do a million different things at the same time, aren't we? But if you set yourself a really focused target like that, it's something that you can hold yourself accountable for, basically. It's
been in the background of my life for the past, I think it's 80 days now in total I've been going. And unbeknownst to me, I've been writing down everything that's in my mind from all the days that I've been doing my runs. And obviously there's 1,001 of the days, and I think I'm up to like 750 or something.
Wow. Okay.
And not every day I write something about it. It's like, just ran around the block.
So, but are you journaling? How would you describe what you're writing in terms of?
I've got, my outline is basically all my GPS data, which I've recorded.
Right, got you.
Of all my runs. So I've got them all on a spreadsheet, 1,001 days of running.
Right.
And every day when I come to write, I know where I've left off. And if I'm picking up at, like, let's say day 560, I look at my spreadsheet, open up my run, and I'm okay. Have I got a story to tell about this run? Sometimes I do, and I'll write about it. If not, I'll be like, okay, I'll just run around the block. Next day. Yeah. So in any writing session of those 4 pages, I could be writing about one day, or I could be writing about 20, depending on what happened in the day. It's just about collecting data at the moment, like getting words out my mind onto page. Yeah. And I've got a massive chunk of paper now. And then the next process will be actually working out what the heart of the story is and then rewriting it. Yeah. That'll be the hard part. I'm doing the easy part at the moment. I'm just writing what comes to mind.
But are you not, as you go, having thoughts that are, it could be this, and then you sort of, it's not going to be that the next day, in terms of the themes that are bubbling to the surface?
I'm just writing everything as kind of like, almost like journaling what happened on that day.
Yeah, got you.
And you'll know what kind of day was important for me because I'll write 2 pages on it. Whereas the days that weren't, they're just like a few lines.
What's jumping out at you about the experience? Are you just writing it down and not really thinking too much, or is something
at the moment? I think I'm trying to shape about what the general kind of through line would be. It would obviously be great for the audience as they read it to know that there was some kind of like transformative experience.
Yeah, but you don't want to push the transformative.
But I'm not going to push it because I don't think there has to be. And I've learned from even talking to people on the podcast that there doesn't have to be this big journey. You can just do something and
and enjoy it.
Enjoy it, come to the end, and you'll have transformed anyway from the past experience. Yeah. But there are certain things, perhaps in my kind of personal or private life or family life, that were happening in the background as well, that might feed in, and it might just be a case of early on in the story we kind of put a few things in, and then suddenly it becomes a bigger thing near the end. Got you. But I think sometimes it's just about, I went on this journey. 1,001 days is something worth celebrating.
It's crazy.
There were lots of adventures along the way, lots of great stories I've got to tell, some maybe funny stories, some, stories where I've like push myself beyond my limits. And that's worth celebrating. And hopefully people will learn and be inspired by that.
Yeah, definitely.
And if there's, you know, a market out there, people who love running and love reading about running, which there's a load of books out there, and hopefully that will fit into that, and it'll just become part of that kind of running scene. So
love it.
That's my hope. I'm not putting any pressure on it at the moment because I'm just collecting the data at the moment, as I say, getting those pages written.
Yeah.
But the hard part is, and I know I will struggle with this because there's another previous book that I'm in the second pass through.
Right.
Is actually when you really work out how can I turn all this gobbledygook into something that is a good reading experience, and that's what actually takes time to craft.
That's hard. That's really hard.
So I can relate to your own experience.
But also, you know, I was really lucky. We had our publishers, so like I was able to ask, you know, is this interesting to you know, lots of different times, and they'd be like, yeah, that bit's good, that bit's all right, you know. And so we would structure it like that, you know, because obviously what happens with this, for example, 52 for us, is that we were just so close to it because it's a year long doing it, and also thinking about it a lot, you know, because obviously you're not just doing the adventure, as we touched on, you're producing it, you're going out researching it, finding the money for it, and, you know, et cetera, that by the end of it, you're like, which one is, you know, which parts are interesting to this, if any? You know, you're almost a bit like so jaded by the whole thing. So yeah, that was lucky to have some other people that we could ask about that, actually.
Just jumping in briefly to say, if you've got this far, you're probably a fan of the show. And it would be great if you wouldn't mind confirming that love by following or subscribing to this podcast. It takes just one click from you, but it really does make a huge difference in getting more people to find this show. Thank you. Now that you have this book published and it's out in the world and it's celebrated by people, do you find it really incredible that when you thought about taking that giant leap of quitting your job, not knowing what this project would become, and actually you talked about it started out being something in a different direction and it kind of evolved into something else, you'd never know at that time that you'd also be the author of a book.
No, you wouldn't. No.
But it's just, it's what you get when you actually allow yourself to be in that position.
Yeah.
Much like I talked about being on the river, and you allow yourself to be immersed by whatever the river and nature can give you by putting yourself in position, by going on a change of path and allowing yourself the full commitment to be creative and work out what your new project is going to be and sculpt it. You allow yourself to these opportunities, and one of them was obviously the publisher coming to say, hey, what you just did, we can turn into a physical copy. Yeah,
well, I mean, when you put it like that, it does sound like quite a I guess a jump, but the reality is there are years in between the two things, and like to say I've been obsessive, and me more so than Jess, she's quite good at detaching herself from stuff, but we've both been very focused over the last few years, constantly trying to tweak the formula and turn it into something. So it hasn't felt like such an abrupt shift, I suppose. But yeah, I think it's about like, I like unpredictability in my life. It kind of excites me, I suppose. You know, I don't want too much of it, but I like not knowing what's going to happen, you know, next week, next month. And I think this lifestyle obviously is suited to that. I've got friends who love predictability. But for I suppose that for those who are excited by the unknown, then doing something like this is an exciting experience, because you don't know. I think the best way to describe it is, when I was working at an agency, I used to be petrified of my email inbox. I just thought, oh God, who's a client's going to email me on a Sunday and tell me something went wrong or whatever. And now I look at my email inbox and I'm really excited, because you just don't know what's going to come through. It might be a book publisher, it might be a really cool campaign, it might be a bit of work, it might be from someone who's read our book and got a lot of value out of it. It could be anything. And I suppose that's, I guess, the best way I have of summarizing, you know, where I'm at now compared to where I was at before. I'm very lucky for it.
How does the relationship between you and your wife work within your kind of
good question
working dynamic?
Oh yeah, well, that is the question that everyone asks that, how do you do it, right? So we're married. We've been together since we were 19. We live together, obviously. We have one child together. We've got another child on the way. We have the travel project. We have the outside studio, and we've got another business that's percolating at the minute. people are like, what are you doing? You're mad. And the answer is, we are a brand of mad for sure. And it's really hard. I think one of the things that Instagram does, which is the lens through a lot of which a lot of people view us, is that they make you think, oh God, they just live this life, wow. But we argue the whole time, the same way that most couples do. Difference in opinions, constantly having creative tussles, see too much of each other, because, get up in the morning and let's go to work, work together. So there's been a lot of figuring that out, and it still is. It's a work in progress that, like, what is the right answer? And I think what we're discovering is that, like, a lot of, not a lot of, as much space as you can have from each other, it is healthy within a work perspective, and then having that, somehow finding that ability to turn it off, and be like, right, work's over, let's go and have a meal and talk about something completely different, or let's go and watch TV and not mention work. So yeah, it's a really good question, and I really want to just reiterate that, like, it's so important that we try and let people know through Instagram, but you also don't want to be like, it's not all great. You don't want to seem like you're complaining, but it's really important for people to know, like, it's not like it's not the Brady Bunch. We don't have this, like, extraordinary, completely argument-free, plain sailing life. It's got arguments and stresses and troubles like everyone else. But I suppose they're just, like, magnified by doing everything together.
What do the two of you each bring to the project?
I can tell you what Jess brings.
Makes it as a bigger whole.
Yeah, I can tell you what Jess brings, because I don't what I bring's up for debate, but she brings, she's incredibly good at strategizing. She's good at strategy. She's incredibly good at identifying a good idea. She's incredibly good at decision making. Business wise, she's got a sharp head. Production wise, she's a natural, very organized. And the thing that we both share, and we've shared since we met when we were 19, we had when we were at agencies, we had in the first iteration of the project, and we still have and will never go away, is a desire to go places that excite us, meet new people, have experiences that are different. And that's what, I guess, drives things on, basically. But yeah, and I think the really important thing, just to add at the final there, is that I think we very much respect each other, which sounds like, of course you have to, but, like, I have it, speaking of her, like, I just respect her completely and all of her ideas and all the things that she wants to do. And I think that's really important, because it really gets tested, it really gets tested, your relationship all round. So you have to have that respect in order to, to go forward, rather than kind of, like, dawdle along, basically.
And we touched on this at the beginning of the conversation, but how do you bring that balance back to your life, where it's not all consuming with work? Because even when you are traveling and holidaying together, you are still working to some extent.
Yeah.
There's never that full disconnect where you can just switch everything off. But I mean, a lot of that you love and you enjoy, which you talked about.
Yeah.
But
it's a good question. And I actually think maybe I'm realizing right now what the answer is for the first time in any sort of vivid clarity. Like, we've got a great set of mates who we love and know forever, and they love us, and they're not interested in what we do at all. And we go and hang out with them, and we just talk about the stuff that we talked about before the travel project started. Like, we're not talking about, we just go and relax and just hang out with them. And we're lucky that we've just had kids, and they've all had kids, and you just don't talk about work ever at all when you're with your friends and when you're out and about socializing. And I think that's quite useful, really, that they just don't care. It's like the same with everyone's job. Like, I do care about my friends and their jobs, but you'll ask them how their job is, and you'll talk about it sometimes, but ultimately you're not hanging out with your mates to talk about their jobs. You're hanging out to talk about all the things you talk about your mates with. So that's pretty pivotal for us. So yeah, just and hang out with family, just people who just don't want to talk about the travel project the whole time.
Well, let me get your advice now for those listening who want to be inspired by what the UK has to offer and for traveling. What recommendations can you give for people who want to adventure in the UK on a budget? Yeah,
well, I mean, so as touched on before, Achievable is a scale, right? So some adventures are more adventurous, they feel like a big adventure for someone, whereas they're like nothing to someone else. And that applies to budget as well, and time and everything. So when it comes to adventures that are really budget friendly, I mean, if you're Scotland based, you've got the privilege, I suppose, of being able to wild camp. And that for me is one of the best things you can do. If you don't live in Scotland, then there's the travel there. And I've got to say, like, I can try and paint the UK out to be this amazing place, but the train system is an absolute disaster. And it costs me a lot of money, as you'll well know, to get around. So, depends on where you're based, of course. But one thing that we are doing this year actually is a good example of something that's quite good on a budget, is we've got a 30-40 pound little gas stove cooker, and we're eating breakfast outside once a month. That's the goal. And we always say with the gas cookers, like, if you go on a walk, that's nice, it's good. But if you go on a walk and you've looked up a little camp recipe and got the ingredients, and you put your stove in your bag, and on the walk there's a spot on the top of the hill with a beautiful view, try and time it so that you go to that spot at sunset or just before and cook up this recipe. It might be, we always do super cheap recipes. They'll cost you like sort of £5 between the two of you. And that experience is hugely amplified. The kind of all the positives are hugely amplified by just having that ritual of cooking there. And it's back to what we were saying earlier, just spending a bit more time in that spot, existing in that spot for 45 minutes, an hour. I find that to be one of the most budget friendly ways to have a unique experience outside. Equally, I would then sort of put house in that same category, going for a swim, looking for a body of water near you, whether it be a beach, which is obviously quite readily available, as discussed in the UK, a river, again, as discussed, a lake, whatever it may be, going for a swim. It's going to be an experience that you're not going to stop talking about for a couple of hours, a couple of days, maybe in a couple of weeks, because it's getting in cold water, hiking there, warming up afterwards, having a cup of tea. I guess they're just perhaps obvious things like that, really. But I think they're things that people often don't have the confidence to do, is what I've found. And we've seen that within our own friends. It's actually just like, it's almost like once you've done it once, you'll do it again. But that first time, there's a barrier there often for people. And basically you don't have to spend loads of money, and you can spend loads of money. Another thing in Scotland, you've got bothies. There are youth hostels. So if this is looking at overnight adventures, a favourite of ours from a wild camping perspective is Dartmoor, where in a lot of the areas it's obviously still legal to wild camp. So you're saving, hundreds of pounds on your accommodation. There are lots of ways to get out there. There are lots of ways to do it without breaking the bank. And we always say, like, your adventure diet, if you will. So it's like, you're not always going to have the full whack, but sometimes you can have these small doses and they will just kind of refresh you on a smaller level. And it might be after work adventure, even a lunchtime adventure when you're working. There are plenty of ways. You just got to have a bit more confidence to do them, I suppose, is the thing with most people.
And how do you help someone redefine what adventure is when they think it should be this grand foreign tour that they go on, when actually sometimes it's about appreciating the local and
Well, yeah, I mean, I suppose like through our pictures and our videos on Instagram, we hope that does a bit of a job. Like with our friendship group, we've just recently started taking our mates out. Well, it's not really taking them out, going out with our friends, and the feedback we've got from them, because I guess they're the hardest to please in a way. Well, our mates are anyway, because they're like, they're sort of, your mates, and they have been like, oh, right, yeah, you don't have to, this is great, So the education piece is done, I guess, through all of our touch points. Like we're just about to release a series of digital guides. We're basically writing up every single place we've been in the UK currently. So the book is a beautiful creation, we hope, of 52 of our favourites, but we're now doing everywhere we've ever been on a digital map. And hopefully that will show people there are loads of options. It really is. There are options down the road from you is going to be the idea.
That will be incredible for you to see as well. Because you can work out, oh, hang on, we haven't been to this stretch of the UK.
Exactly.
What can we find there?
That's exactly it. Yeah. So we're plotted out on a map, is the way that it's the app's set up. And like you say, you're seeing these sort of heat patches, and then there's these sparser patches. So for example, I used to go on holiday to Yorkshire, as I've touched on, as Jess actually, obviously separately when we were younger. But that's a gap on our map, and it's like, cool, let's go to Yorkshire. Well, let's go. We started to research what we can do up there. But yeah, that's quite exciting. It's also including all of the places that we eat, before and after, and the little places you can stay along the way. So it's pulling together itineraries and maps within that. So it's a big bit of work, but very pleasing because you finally can chronicle it all.
Where's that map going to be?
So it's going to be, it'll be sold on our Instagram.
Will that be your own app?
No, so it's actually a company called Rexby.
Right.
Who are a really interesting Icelandic company, and they're really, well, actually we've only spoken to one of the guys there, but he's lovely, really lovely bloke, which is obviously a good start when you're trying to figure out whether you want to do something, but they're really sharp as well. And they host it. And
this is like an app that travel creators can use to.
Yeah. So their thesis is basically like, the travel industry is changing, travel agencies changing. Whereas you used to go down to the high street and talk to a travel agent about somewhere they'd perhaps been once or twice, the travel agent, because that was their job to go out there and know a bit about it. Now you've got people like us who are fortunate enough to have been to lots of places and really stress tested them. We've been to some things that we haven't thought are great, and luckily we've got the freedom to say that they weren't great. So Rexby have come in and gone, they're going to work with a select few people who have really done a lot within their respective countries, and put together these maps. So it's quite exciting. It was very exciting for us for a multitude of reasons, but as I say, it's really satisfying because you're digging in the archives as well. You're like, what was that cafe called in the Outer Hebrides that we really liked? And it's like, okay, it was that. They're kind of just like, you can file that, finally get it out of your head, and get excited about all of these things that you'd forgotten about. You're like, people are going to love that because, we can tell them about the fisherman who sells the prawns on the dock of the harbour up there or whatever it may be. I'm hoping that is people are going to be like, wow, there is a lot to do here. You don't have to go too far to experience all these things. So I'm hoping that's going to lower the barriers to entry a bit as well.
Amazing. Okay, bad weather is something you cannot escape in the UK.
Absolutely not.
Typically wet, miserable grey skies. We're currently in the depths of winter as well. Having a cold spell in the last week or so. You touched on this actually earlier about your first trip to Scotland and how you were wondering what to do in the bad weather. And I guess sometimes there's a case of, okay, if you look at the forecast, yes, you're going to see bad weather because it's rarely actually good on the forecast anyway. But on a local level, that's not the big picture. Like rain passes.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then sunshine follows.
Exactly. Yeah.
And if you allow yourself to be in that place, you might then spot that little capture of beauty as the sun just falls through the clouds and illuminates this building that you're looking at. And that won't ever be forecast. No. There's only be something that you had to experience there and then. But we typically do have bad weather. And I think one of the quotes I saw, I think yours was, the wetter the weather, the cozier the cabin.
Hi. Yeah, I think I did like that. Yeah.
This is one way to experience the bad weather in the UK.
Yeah.
In some of the amazing cabins that are on offer to stay in.
Yeah, and I think actually this ties into our conversation about how much the landscape of the UK staycation market has changed as well, because there were B&Bs, right, back in the day. Cool, I love B&Bs. They're often quite cost effective and you get to meet the people who own the house, etc. But now what has evolved is that, especially from COVID, there's been this boom in, I guess, like cabin culture and cabin life. It's gone too far, you could argue, but that's another conversation. But what it is people have created these experiences in really interesting places all around the UK. So it might just be just outside the M25, but it might be in an old forest, and it might be on a lake that you can swim in. And so the relevance of this obviously is that you can go, and if it absolutely pisses with rain for the 2 days you're there, you can still have an experience that is cool and fun and exciting, because you go out and get wet. Assume everyone's got a rain jacket. Go out, get soaking wet, go back inside, put the fire on. Oh, that was quite exhilarating. Cook some food, and it's cozy, and it doesn't feel like you're just sort of like holed up in a sort of boring room or whatever it may be. So yeah, we're really fortunate. We get to stay in some really cool places. So it doesn't always have to be a really cool place. I mean, the other thing I would always say to people is that, like, to an extent, weather is like, no, it's not a mindset. Your approach to your mindset when it comes to the weather is quite a big thing. I just went to Wales with a few of my friends, and it was torrential, but we had all prepped. I said, boys, make sure you bring full waterproofs, trousers, boots, you're sealed up, and let's get out there and have it. And we did that, and it was great. It's great. We were out for 2, 3, 4 hours, got absolutely drenched, but then got back and got dried up, and it was a lot of fun. That of course changes when you have kids a little bit, as we're experiencing, but to an extent it's true of them. And whenever it's like, if it's really heavy rain when we're away, we'll look at a map or Google, and we'll look for a forest. And if you go for a walk in a forest in the absolute chucking it rain, you're going to get a lot less wet, and it's a lot more manageable than if you go for a walk up a hill. It's as simple as that. So there are lots of ways to circumnavigate the rain issue, but also what you said is absolutely true, and that's a point that a lot of people don't get. We've got some videos that we put on Instagram about, I guess, celebrating the UK. And if a video does well on Instagram, it goes a little bit viral or whatever, you'll get people coming in and being rude effectively. And one of the things that we always get is that, like, this is an unfair representation. I've lived in the UK and it rains every day, and all the rest of it. And it's like, well, actually, if you're out, as you touched on, in a rainy day, there will be a patch. More than likely, there'll be a patch where it just looks glorious. And obviously that's the time you're going to get your camera out, because you don't want to get it wet and you want to capture it. So yeah, I think it's very rare that you're going to go away.
You miss that if you stay inside, because you've followed the forecast.
Exactly.
And if you really think about it, those who live in the UK will know that actually the number of days when it continuously rains all day is actually few and far between.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to know the stat on that, but it's really small numbers, I would say. Yeah. And that's again, it's a bit of an educational piece. Like, people are just like, oh, the UK is boring. It rains the whole time. It's miserable. It's, really, really expensive. All of the things, there's some truth in it, but there's also a lot that can be done about a lot of those things. We've found anyway. And rain is, we find ourselves talking about rain a lot, because also we're thinking about rain a lot because you're studying the maps. But there's a quote about Scotland, as if, like, you don't like the weather in Scotland, just wait 30 minutes and it will change completely. And I think that's true of the whole of the UK to an extent, really.
That's the beauty of our island country, I suppose.
You're on an island. When you're in the mountains especially, it's just the system's just changing. Like, no one can really predict it that well.
How about seasonal highlights? What to do in the winter, spring, autumn, summertime? Yeah.
So I'll start with summer, because it jumps out at me, because I was doing some research the other day, and the summer solstice this year is on a Saturday, which is cool because it means most people won't be working. So I would always say it's a cool time to go on an adventure. Fingers crossed the weather will be good. Go somewhere where you can see the horizon, where you can watch the sun slip off. Quite a cool moment. Like, I will, again, back to the cooking thing, I would always say take some food with you, take some beers or whatever it is that you're into. And watch the sun slip off on the longest day of the year in the UK. It's a beautiful moment. It's just that if you get the summer weather, it's just warm and you're most likely in shorts and a t-shirt and you're sat there with your mates or whoever it may be, watching the sun slip off on the longest night of summer. It's a great thing to do, and it's a Saturday. So I would suggest that this year, every year, but especially on a Saturday. And then working in a very illogical order, I'd go to spring just because that's what I've got my eyes on now. Spring everywhere. Go everywhere that you're lucky enough to go in spring, because you're going to get places off peak because the schools haven't broken up and people aren't holidaying in the UK on the whole. But they're colourful. The flowers are out. The air has just turned to that slightly warmer stuff. It's not too hot. It's not too cold. We did 3 years ago when Sonny was just born. Actually, we did 3 years ago in the spring. We did a trip around Cornwall, and it was just great. There was no one there. The places were open. There were people there, but you felt like, okay, this is a great time to come here. You're not overwhelming the roads. You're not, the businesses, the infrastructure can handle it. People are really pleased to see you. The atmosphere is just different. So I would really recommend going to usually busy places in the spring if you can. And then autumn, this is a really odd order. Autumn for me is forests, on the whole. We almost every autumn plan one trip to the Wye Valley or that neck of the woods. Wales, basically, I would say is good if you can get into Wales. Big forests. Jess always laughs at me because I love forests. She's like, they're all the same. I was like, to go see the colours, really. I think there's something spectacular about that. It's arguably, for me, the best season. Although what's on the horizon is obviously not as exciting as...
but it's this last chance to appreciate something before it turns glum.
Yeah.
So you may as well get out there and appreciate it.
Yeah.
It's not, it's fading.
It's fading, but in fading in the most beautiful way possible, really. So I'd say that. And then winter, which we're in, again, we're always talking about winter's not that bad. And you've got to be careful with that because people suffer in winter, and I know that from a personal perspective. I've got family that genuinely really clinically suffer, so you have to be careful with that. But if you slightly reframe the way you see winter, in my opinion, in our opinion, you can get quite a lot out of the season. Going out and getting, we say, sort of doing battle with the elements, if you want to call it that, on a beach in the middle of winter is always a good one, because if it really heavily rains in the winter and you're on grass and you're hiking, it can be a bit trudgy and you could be in a bog and you can be like, oh God, this is heavy going. If you're on a beach, the sand's wet from the sea, so it doesn't really make any difference. As long as you're wrapped up warm and thingy. And there's no one on the beaches in the winter. There's no one on the beaches. You speak to any dog walker who lives near the coast, they'll be like, I love it in the winter. There's no one on these big, vast stretches. Holcombe, up in Norfolk. Yeah, beautiful place to be in the winter. Like, what amazing experience. You go in there in the summer, it's packed, right? And you go there in the winter, same place, no one there. It's amazing, spectacular, really. So for me, the big one in winter is beaches. If you can, go to beaches because you get to enjoy them all to yourself. And then, obviously with recency bias, I would say Scotland, the Highlands in winter. Again, it's back to that thing of there not being anyone there. Like, for me, that's a experience that allows you to think completely differently. If let's say you live in a city, London, Birmingham, wherever it may be, when do you see no one? Never. It just doesn't happen.
I suppose it's the best chance you'll find snow.
Yeah, well, Cairngorms. Yeah, so Cairngorms is the highest snowfall in the UK. They've got an extraordinary percentage of days up there. They've just had a really serious snow up there, so it was a bit more tricky at that time. But
have you done the reindeer experience?
So we've done the Cairngorms and we've seen reindeer at a distance.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So there's one particular place you can go that we were there for other reasons, and we did see reindeer. Yeah. And Cairngorms is one of those places that you speak to someone about, and they'll be like, what are you talking about? Cairngorms, never heard of it. And in fairness, I think maybe I hadn't ever heard of it, but it's amazing. Have you been?
Yeah, I went snowboarding there.
Oh, cool.
Incredible place to, the fact that we could, on a moment's notice, as soon as there's snow there, you can just drive up to Scotland and go snowboarding. You don't have to have to get on a plane to go to France and everything and book an expensive holiday. You can just go up there and stay in some local accommodation and have a weekend snowboarding.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that speaks to the culture again of like, people just don't think things are possible because it's the UK. But actually, you can go and do that. And equally, like, I would highly recommend going for a trek up on the plateau up there, which again, you're probably familiar with it. But it's the UK's only Arctic wilderness. That's how it's referred to. And when you're up there, it's just, you're on the ceiling of Britain. You're up there, just like, it's completely bizarre. When we went in the winter, covered in snow. The weather systems are coming through, like literally 3 an hour. So you're just watching this show. Absolutely beautiful. So yeah, I think there are loads of options in winter that would surprise people.
I'll tell you briefly about my reindeer experience there, because there's a place in the Cairngorms where you can go and feed the reindeer. Yeah, and they are technically wild reindeer, right? They have this huge expanse of wilderness, acres and acres where they can, but they also know where they can get fed. Several times a week. Yeah. So generally, they all, well, not all, but some of them accumulate in this field where you can pay to have this experience where you feed the reindeer. And you get the most remarkable access to these wonderful, majestic wild animals that are unlike any deer that you ever see in the UK. Yeah. And you get to pet them and stroke them. Yeah, amazing. They're very calm because they're used to they're being fed. And my God, the feeling and the sensation of me putting my bare hand into reindeer fur and it getting lost because it's so deep. Yeah. And so soft.
Yeah, it's amazing.
When you talk about some of these experiences you have with that stay with you for months, for years, that is one of them. That first initial feeling of touching the reindeer and putting my hand deep into that fur. Yeah,
but also I assume that feeling slightly informed by the fact that you just didn't think potentially that sort of thing was possible, right? Like there's so many things like that where I come away thinking like, I didn't think I could do that. It's an amazing kind of shift in perspective of like what your expectations are. You suddenly opens your mind up.
I think you have to go fly to Lapland to go and have a reindeer experience.
Exactly. No, it's amazing. So yeah, the winter's got loads going for it, and really is only a short. It's 25% of the year technically. So it's not.
It just feels the longest.
It always feels the longest because of course it stretches out, but like. Yeah, I think part of what our messaging is across the board is like, do go to places out of season. It's good for everyone involved. It's good for the local infrastructure, economy and communities. But also you'll have a superior experience a lot of the time because you'll get to this incredible place to enjoy it by yourself. But also the winter message across the board is like, you might as well make the most of winter. Like if you want to just sit and watch Netflix the entire time and you enjoy that cozy thing of holding up, I totally get that 100%. But if it does get you down, a walk, a hike, even if it's in the rain, I guarantee you will just give you a little boost, and that you might even want to do it again, and it might even be transformational in that it might start to become a habit, and one that you just never thought you were going to get into, which has been the story with us.
What's on the horizon then for you as the travel project evolves in 2025, but also beyond? You've had this experience of writing one book. There must be kind of wondering what else you possibly could do in that medium, because it's great producing all this digital work, but like you said earlier on, it's just become a little bit superficial. It's like it's never really fully cherished because it's always one swipe away from something else. Whereas having this physical copy, it's like a heritage which stands on a shelf which people can reach to again and again. It's easily accessible.
No, it's a good question. We're really lucky because the book seems to have done quite well, which is great. And so our publishers said, let's start talking about another book. And then, the question obviously is what is the other book? And I think the introduction of children into the story, if you will, is interesting for the meaning of Achievable Adventure. We've sort of resisted. We don't want to do child-focused project, because for a multitude of reasons, really, it feels essentially unfair on them, but also I don't want it to all be about that. But I do think there's certainly some messaging that we find quite valuable around your life's not over. You know, I remember in the build up to having Sonny, everyone was like, oh, you're gonna have to stop doing what you do. You're gonna have to completely change it up. And like, what we realized is that we didn't have to completely change it. We had to adapt it. And it's all still possible. So we get a lot of messages about that. It's arguably the top 5 things we get messages about is like, you know, I've just had a kid. Have you got any tips on like, you know, what I should be doing adventure wise in the first month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, you know? And people just really, you know, because at that time you're really wanting to know, I guess, have advice. So there's potential for something along those lines. But what we're in the middle of concocting and planning at the moment is partnering with psychologists who have expertise in an outdoor and adventure field, so in that space, and collaborating with them on creating some work. So at the moment it's all right at the beginning, but looking at like basically making films. The thinking being is that when I'm scrolling on Instagram, I'm so bored of everyone professing to be an expert in stuff that they're not experts in. Like, I get it, I understand where that comes from, but it gets lost, you know, people telling people how to live their lives and all the rest of it. So we thought, well, we know how it makes us feel. It makes us feel good. But if you want to dive into that in any more technical, granular detail, we do not have the expertise. We haven't done the work. So now we want to partner with people to understand a little bit more about, you know, what's actually happening to your brain when you're outside. You know, why is it good for kids to get half an hour of fresh air a day? So there's a project at the moment that we're working on that we're quite excited about, because we feel like it will be a project that is completely driven by our own deep interest. And that's always for us a good sign, you know, when you're doing something because you're really, really into it. So we're doing that. So
that's something that's fusing your own experience and realizing what the access to the natural world can bring you, but actually backing it up with some kind of actual scientific expert.
Data and research. Yeah, exactly. It's exactly that, you know, because I can come and chuck superlatives to you all day, which I've literally been doing. You know, it makes you feel incredible. It makes you feel alive. It makes you feel, you know, but I'm just telling you how it makes me feel. Whereas as soon as you start reading into the topic, just Google and, you know, the science of why being outdoors makes you feel good, you'll realize, God, there's so much to read about it. It's so interesting how, you know, children who spend, I think I don't get the stat wrong, but I think children who spend, you know, half an hour a day outside are far less likely to experience anxiety in their older, more formative years. Just half an hour of outdoor time a day, and there's so much like that I think if people are given that information in a digestible and I guess entertaining and exciting format, which hopefully is something that we can do, it can actually have an impact because they'll take it on board and be like, wow, okay, well, I hadn't thought about it like that. And that will be, you know, back to our mission as a project, we'll hopefully just get more people outside because it will just be like, okay, well, there's expertise here mixed with entertainment, and hopefully that product will get people to, you know, have a similar experience to what we've had, basically. So yeah, it's really interesting. Well, we think it's really interesting anyway. And these people are so intelligent and talented. And we're doing another project as well called Going Places, which is going to be running throughout this year, which is it's essentially a staycation series. Makes it sound a bit bland, but looking at these incredible places you can stay around the UK in terms of cabins, lighthouses, caves in some cases, and talking people through the actual physical location and the story, because they're often owned by interesting people, but then also what you can do using that as a launch pad. So I guess it kind of offers people like ideas as to how they might be able to have, you know, quite an extraordinary long weekend in the UK. So all of these little projects, they're kind of like little mini projects within our project. The history for us shows that they'll grow organically, and some will come to the fore and be the thing, that our next thing. But yeah, who knows?
What are your big takeaways you've learned from having now a child being part of your adventure and adapting, and what you do to adapt your own experiences with Jess?
Do way less is the main thing. So before, we used to, if you combine the photography and videography with a desire to do loads, you just didn't want to miss anything. So before, it was just like, we weren't manic, but we were running around like blue ass flies. It was a real like, do as much as you can, like see as much as that. Kids, slow right down, do one thing a day. And if you get that done, you'll be lucky. And the byproduct of that, perhaps obviously, is that you are a lot less, you're able to engage with it in a totally different way. You slow right down. And then, Sonny is, fortunately, or perhaps this is because he's been in the outdoors since he was little, he really comes alive in the outdoors. So showing him things outdoors that perhaps previously you just take for granted, little tiny things, and seeing his reaction to that, whether it be joy or more often than not intrigue, is an extremely fulfilling experience, of course, but it's also changes the way you view almost everything, or the way we do anyway. Like last week up in Scotland, we cooked some bacon sandwiches on the beach, on New Year's Day actually, which was quite cool. And there was no one else there. Sun was shining, absolutely beautiful. And he was just so interested in that experience, I guess perhaps obviously, or we had to cross a river another day, and so I had to give everyone a piggyback over this river. So I took my boots off, and the three little boys, they were looking at me like this, what, you can't do that, just like, you can almost see their minds expanding there and then. So yeah, it's completely transformative having a kid for on every level possible, basically. So it makes you do less, but have a richer experience doing that, I would say.
Where's your favourite place?
In the UK?
In the UK.
I mean, for me, it's Scotland, and I would say the Highlands. And I actually wouldn't say the Outer Hebrides. I said I've had one of my favourite experiences there, but my favourite place where I feel I'm at my kind of most happy, relaxed, engaged, all of the things that I like being, states I like being, would be the Highlands. Yeah, something about that. My mum Scottish, from Scotland, so there might be something in that, I'm not sure, but I think it's the feeling of actual wild, where there's far less rules, seemingly, far less boundaries than there are anywhere else. For me, that's a pretty special element to up there.
Okay, well, those who don't already know about you can find you at the Travel Project, online, or your book, Achievable Adventures, 52 of the UK's most unforgettable experiences, at any good bookstore, or also online. I suppose I'll close things by saying, where are you off to next?
Oh, that's a very good question. Oh, we're actually going to Scotland on Tuesday.
Back
up to Scotland, yeah. That's on a for our agency. We've got a shoot up at Glen Eagles. I'm sure you've heard of
the
Glen
golf
Eagles.
Place, yeah.
Yeah, it's a big hotel as well.
Yeah.
So we're going to shoot up there. So yeah, back up. However many hours that is in the car, which is quite exciting. But then Jess is due, we've got a second baby on the way. She's due quite soon. So we're currently kind of figuring out what we can do within the scope of that. But where is on our list this year is Yorkshire. We really want to hit Yorkshire and show some of that coastline, some of the beautiful moors. And that's what I'm most excited about this year.
Well, I can't wait to follow along and be inspired by some of the incredible experiences you have. That makes me wanderlust about this lovely, great country that I'm proud to call home. And I guess I thank you as well for celebrating that. And I feel like this was a great fusion of the podcast. You know, the travel project meets Great British Adventures is really at the heart of what I want to champion, is stories like yourself. So
Great. Well, no, it's been a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for tuning in. If you want to find out more information about any of the guests, please check out the show notes, where you'll also find links to things mentioned in the conversation. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please take a look through the past recordings. There's so many more incredible stories for you to find, and I can't wait for you to enjoy them. Thank you.